That was a while ago. All right. Are we on?
You may begin.
You may begin. Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa O'Brien.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Pam Otto.
And we are here today to talk to you about wild versus pets. And today's topic is about canines, wild canines, and your pet canines. So Pam and I have some things we'd like to share with you about these different animals. And the first thing we want to kind of say is that wild canines, those would be your wolves, coyotes, foxes, versus the kind of pet dogs that we have. And actually they were domesticated about 15,000 years ago, so that puts you at about the Ice Age. So when we had the archaic Indians coming in hunting mastodons, sometimes they would have these domesticated wolves, or somewhat domesticated wolves, not as domesticated as they are today, coming with them to help them hunt. And actually we have a picture here of a Native American. Hope you guys can see this. Native Americans that actually use dogs to help hunt, as well as to help transport their items. They would use a thing called a travois, which was kind of like a sled, and the dogs would actually pull that. And then they moved into horses depending on the type of American tribe that was there. So dogs have been used a long time, not just as pets, but also as hunting companions and companions in their areas. So today we're going to talk about what makes a wild canine wild and what makes a canine a canine. So Pam, let's start off with some of our wild friends that we have here. We're in Illinois, so we're going to talk about some of our native Illinois canines, the coyotes, red fox, and gray fox.
And I think looking at our webinar enrollees, I think pretty much everybody's eastern United States, so you probably are familiar with this creature right here. This would be the coyote. Canis latrans is the scientific name. This animal has made huge advancements across the United States over the last, I would say, 40 to 50 years. Way back when, Illinois really didn't have that many wild coyotes, but they have moved into this area, and they are in the news all the time.
And some of you may have known in your area that wolves have been in your area. Wolves actually lived here in Illinois for quite some time. When they began to be extirpated, which means they were kind of moved out, they lost their territory, the coyotes then kind of came in and filled in that niche. So wolves now, you know, they're out kind of western. We do see them in areas like Minnesota around here. But wolves come through Illinois now, but we haven't necessarily had them living here in Illinois.
Well, and some of you may have seen, there was a documentary a couple years ago on PBS about a crossbred animal called a Coywolf. There was a lot of footage shot in around New York. I believe they were up in Massachusetts too. And there are actual documented instances of coyotes and wolves interbreeding in the extreme eastern part of the country. What was a little, I thought a little deceiving in that documentary was they talked about coy wolves as though they were here in the Chicago area, which is, again, where we're coming from. And there's really, so far, been no indication of coyotes getting crossed with wolves in this area. A lot of people, though, it doesn't stop people from saying they think they see coy wolves. This time of year, late winter, coyotes are going to appear their largest. They have really thick coats of fur, which helps them survive the winter. Just like your pet dogs may grow extra fur in the winter as well, but that's a great adaptation for getting them through the cold winters. Coyotes also have a pretty good covering of fur on their ears. Again, helps them with the cold. I'm going to swing this guy around here so you can see the fluffy coyote tail. Another adaptation for survival in cold that actually functions as a blanket, because the one part of the coyote's body that is not covered with fur is this nose. And that nose is very vulnerable, especially we had that polar vortex blow through here about a month ago. If coyotes around here did not have something to cover up with, they would have gotten frostbite. So any parts of their body that were not covered with fur would have perished in that cold.
Yeah, and just like we have to cover up with hats and mittens and scarves to keep the warmth in, they have to have that thick fur to help them. They have layers of fur too to help keep them nice and warm through these cold months.
Let's look at the outside characteristics, but Lisa, let's take a look at the inside. We've got
a skull here for a coyote. And taking a look at some of the features that make a canine, one of the things that they have on the skull is that they have this nice long nose, and you can see that on the coyote itself.
Do a compare and contrast?
Compare and contrast. So smell is really important to canines. They use sight as well, and hearing and smell to help them find their prey. Smell and hearing is the two most efficient senses that they use to help them hunt. You also see they have some nice big teeth that they use for catching their prey. And then they also have, being a predator, if you look at the front of them, their eyes are in front here, so they can actually see the animals that they're hunting.
That might be kind of cool to show you guys a comparison between a coyote skull and a cat skull.
Yeah, I'll go down.
You know, when you think of a cat, you don't necessarily think of them as being extremely round. Here you go.
Sorry, we're having a hard time with our camera. There we go.
But the cats are generally smaller than coyotes, so the skull itself is smaller. But look at the placement of the eyes here. Again, they're forward. They're huge in comparison to the size of the skull. Big eyes, cats typically, if they were in the wild, would be operating in either the dawn and dusk hours or overnight. So they need those larger eyes to gather whatever available light they have. They also have fewer teeth than a dog. We turn the skull over. See a lot fewer teeth on our cat than what we have on the dog.
Mm-hmm. Large canines here for grabbing and tearing the prey that they're eating.
I should mention, sometimes here at the Hickory Knolls, where Lisa and I work, our nature center, we'll have people bring us skulls, and they want to know what it is. Sometimes, and I tell you, 99% of the time it is a raccoon. But something that, if you're interested in mammal study, you might want to get familiar with are mammal field guides. This is the Peterson Guide to North American mammals. There's a cool thing in the back. Besides, all the pictures showing you different types of mammals, in the back there is a chart of dental formulas. So if you are presented with a skull, or if you find a skull, you can go to the back and you count the teeth in your skull, and you might not be able to get an exact species, but you can at least get it down to family. And just by counting the number of teeth, if you've got both the upper and lower jaws, that's even better, because the formulas count both upper and lower teeth.
With the canines, they have 42 total teeth, and those teeth comprise 12 incisors.
This one's missing a couple.
Yeah, in the front here. 4 canines, which are the pointy ones that we see. 16 premolars, which would be these, and then 10 carnasals and molars, so those would be the back chewing teeth. So your domesticated dogs should also have those same kind of teeth. They're not obviously hunting for their food, but they still have that, they maintain that wildness with the type of teeth that they have within their skulls.
So coyotes are probably our most popular, and actually the wild canine that gets the worst reputation, but they are not by any means the only wild canines we have around here. Mm-hmm. By the way, I should probably jump to defend coyotes. They are doing what they do this time of year. I don't know if where you live you've heard about pets getting attacked by coyotes, but it does happen. So often, though, when it's reported in the news, it's positioned as the coyote being hungry. The coyote needs food. It's winter time. The coyote needs to eat. More often than not, though, these attacks are occurring during the breeding season. Coyotes, as well as the other animals we're going to talk about today, the foxes, their breeding season, they start their courtship in December and January. That's when their bodies are changing. They're getting ready for the breeding season. They want to make sure that there's no competition for their coming offspring. They want to eliminate any other canines in their territories. And that other canine might be another coyote family. It might be foxes. It might be dogs. So sometimes pets are attacked, not because the coyote wants to eat it, but they're just trying to make sure things are safe for when their own family comes along, usually in April or so.
Yeah, and most recently we've heard a lot of coyotes howling and yipping and calling, which is how they communicate between other members of their group. And starting of that courtship season, they're creating dens right now so that they can be prepared to have those pups come along in about April timeframe. All right, should we talk about our fox? Yeah. So another common canine, wild canine that we have here in our area is the red fox. Most people can identify the red fox because of its color. It's red. And also we have the nice bushy tail. Pam talked about the bushy tail from the coyote. This is what kind of people see maybe first, is that big bushy tail of the red fox. Now the red fox, being a wild canine, lives here. Sometimes people associated with being around human structures. They've had to learn to adapt to living with the coyote because they are competitors with the coyote. Diet-wise, we think of them all being carnivores, but again, with all those different types of teeth, they're actually omnivorous, and coyotes, as well as red foxes, actually can eat not just rabbits and deer, but they will eat berries and different types of fruits when they're in season too. So that idea that they're eating all types of dogs and things like that is not necessarily true. It depends on what the season is. But if you take a look at our red fox, you can see very similar characteristics to the coyote, but a little bit smaller. The red fox is a lot smaller than our coyote. But again, we have the pointed fur-covered ears, again for good hearing, the nice and forward so they can catch the sounds of their prey. The forward-looking eyes, again indicative of a predator. Long nose for this animal, but a little bit shorter than the coyote, again needing that sense of smell so that the long nose can actually take in what the different types of things are around there. And again, they have, can't see the teeth on this one, but the same types of teeth as the coyote.
I'm going to swing our demo fox around here so you can see the tail. And now this is a rather old taxidermy mount, but you can still kind of see the last little bit of white on the tip of this animal's tail. More often than not, unless they've had an adverse encounter of some sort, a red fox is going to have white on the tip of its tail. Because sometimes we'll get calls from people who say, I think I've got, actually they usually call because they're upset because they think they have a coyote in their yard. But we always ask them to describe the animal because even though red fox is known for its red color, some individuals are more brown. Even though coyotes are known for their brown color, sometimes individuals are more red. So they can be sometimes a little hard to distinguish between, but look for that white tip on the end of the red fox's tail, and then coyote's tail is more often tipped in dark brown or black.
And like people, just because they're a fox or they're a coyote, they'll have that variation in size and color. So some people think that they have a wolf coming through their yard when really it's just kind of a large coyote. So it really is important to look for some of those really specific details about the animal that you're looking at.
And again, this time of year, everything looks bigger because they've got those thick winter coats.
Right. And speaking of those thick winter coats, if you can see on the pads of, hang on, trying to find it. There, the pads of the fox here, lots of fur there, and they need that fur there because if they're walking on ice and snow, they got to have those pads covered so they can keep nice and warm on the bottoms of their feet, which I believe, Miss Pam, isn't that a difference between our pet and our wild dogs?
Yes, the amount of fur. Yeah, that these guys are out all the time, through all the thousands of years that dogs have been domesticated. Some traits have gotten bred out, some in more breeds than in others, but there's a lot of domestic dogs who have kind of scant amounts of fur in between their feet. This time of year, you see a lot of dogs wearing booties because of that.
Yes, I've got dogs with red booties in my neighborhood.
Hey.
The last canine that we're going to talk about here that's wild in our area, and actually it's not even been seen in our area for quite some time, is the gray fox. And you might say, well, we get our colors from foxes. You can tell the coat on this fox is gray, like the red of the fur from our red fox. But again, some of those same characteristics of that canid family, those short, nice foxy pointed ears, fur covered, again, predator eyes in front, the length of snout. This one's got some whiskers too, like the others did. Nice coloration on the gray here. You got this nice white throat. The interesting thing about this canine is that it used to be in this area, and now we don't see gray foxes hardly at all. An interesting adaptation they have is they can climb trees, but again, with the presence of so many coyotes in our areas, these guys could not really compete as well as the red fox, and they have moved off into different areas. The red fox learned to kind of adapt with people and move into maybe underneath their sheds or near their homes, whereas the gray fox just did not want to adapt to humans that much and moved off into different places.
If we could talk for just a minute about the adaptation of the claws on the feet. A gray fox, Lisa, you mentioned that they can climb trees. They actually have a semi-retractable claw, similar to what you'd see in a domestic cat. The red fox and the gray fox are in completely different genera. They are not very closely related. We tend to lump them together because of their common names being similar. But yeah, these guys definitely are. They're more likely to have their young in a tree cavity, whereas the red fox would down on the ground. And as you mentioned, Lisa, the red fox has just been so much more readily adaptable to living around humans. Yeah, under sheds, under decks, under porches. What I think the foxes have realized, the red foxes have realized that humans we're noisy and we're kind of scary, but we also keep things away. Coyotes will kind of shy away from us. Especially when they're busy raising their own young. Coyotes, like we see it right here at the Nature Center, we've got coyotes who will den out in our natural areas, and right across the street in our neighborhoods, that's where we see our foxes raising their young. Now, with that said, this year we've seen a really interesting change in behavior. The red fox population here we're in St. Charles, Illinois, which is about 40 miles west of Chicago. Our fox population had been down for some time. The influx of coyotes combined with a parasite called Sarcoptic Mange really took their numbers down. Mange is a horrible thing. It causes animals to lose their fur. It's very uncomfortable. They get all itchy. They scratch a lot. It's a horrible thing to catch. Some do survive, but it's oftentimes fatal. So we lost a lot of foxes, and then they started to rebound, and then the coyotes came in, knocked the population back. But at least locally here in St. Charles, the foxes seem to be making yet another comeback. And what we're seeing in our natural area is a lot of signs. I don't know if you study at all about the sorts of signs animals leave behind, but of course everybody knows about tracks, and especially out now in the snow, it's easy to follow tracks. But there's also something called scat. That would be the, I say it? Poop. That an animal leaves behind. You can actually tell if you are walking along the trail of a domestic dog or a fox or a coyote by looking at the scat they leave behind. Well, for years back here in our natural area, we would find coyote scat, and that was it. Well, dogs. People walk their dogs back there and don't pick up after them. But this past fall, we started noticing fox scat along with coyote scat.
Well, that as well as the smell. You can smell the coyote's urine, or I'm sorry, the red fox urine as you're walking right up on it. It almost smells a little skunky. And so, we will be walking through the natural area and it's like, oh, I smell red fox. I smell red fox again. And so after, a few times being out in the natural area this spring and summer and even fall, it's like we must be, and that's how we kind of clued in that our fox population was increasing because we were smelling them more. We were seeing more of their scat. You can tell kind of what they're eating again by the scat because you can see the remains that are in there, whether it's seeds from the raspberries that they're eating, or it's the fur from the rabbits.
From the plums.
It's from the plums.
The corn from the corn.
Yep, or even the deer fur that we see more so in the wintertime.
Yeah. Well, as we move through spring and summer and into fall, the signs Lisa mentioned that odor of the fox urine became stronger, more prevalent in different places. We got into winter and we started noticing a lot of, we call them scat wars. Coyote scat, fox scat, coyote scat. Because scat is, besides just a way of emptying the digestive system, scat also serves as a means of communication. You've probably seen your dogs, if you have a pet dog, sniffing what some other dog has left behind. There's lots of chemical messages that are left behind in scat. Well, the coyotes, and they'll actually use that to mark their territories along the trails.
And the way they do that is there's these things called anal glands that are within, just inside the anus there, and when they defecate, that kind of smell comes out. So we don't smell it as humans, but different animal species can smell this, so they know like even which coyote is coming through that area, so they know which pack they're in.
Male, female, young, old, sick, healthy. You can tell a lot from the scents that they pick up.
And if you're walking your dog and you know your dog stops and pees on everything, again, they're trying to mark over where the last neighborhood dog has been. They do the same thing. It's not just scat, it's also urine that they're spreading around, so that different animals know where they are, where their territory lies, and so they can kind of go, well, maybe I shouldn't go over there because that's coyote territory, and so the red fox might go to a different area.
Right. So, if we review the scene as Lisa described it, we were smelling the fox scent last spring. We noticed a little bit in summer. Definitely started noticing it in fall. I would say it was right around Halloween that we got a message from a parent who was watching their child play soccer. Our nature center has naturally in the back, soccer fields in the front, and there was a dead fox in the soccer field. And at the time, I didn't really think too much of it. I thought, perhaps it was old and died. Perhaps it got hit by a car, crawled onto the field and died. We had the fox removed, the game went on, no big deal. Well, about a month later, fox number 2 shows up dead. And remember, we're also noticing increased signs of encounters or territory wars between the coyotes and the foxes. Fox number 2 was really torn apart. It was very near an area that a month later a den showed up. So again, underscoring the fact that coyotes do fiercely defend their territory, and they do attack animals, whether it's a wild dog like a fox or a domestic dog. They want to make sure their territory is clear and safe, so that when their offspring come, they'll have a safe environment to grow up in. Right. So we're kind of keeping an eye out. We found 2 dens now in the natural area behind us. We don't know if it's the same pair that's made both dens and they've just relocated, or if we've got 2 coyote dens, or if we've got a coyote den and a fox den. So lots of cool developments taking place.
So Miss Pam, I see down here, sorry Mrs. S, we didn't get to you earlier, but it says, was that a dog behind you?
As a matter of fact,
we do have some live props, because talking about our wild canines, we also wanted to make sure that you understood that our pet dogs look very much like their wild cousins. Evolutionary speaking, they have been evolved from those wolves and domesticated. Today we have so many different breeds of dogs. The reason for that is we have different uses for them. We didn't used to have all these little toy dogs, but people want smaller dogs, so breeders have been working with different breeds to make sure they get whatever use they want, from small lap dogs to dogs they can go hunting with, and dogs that hunt in certain ways in certain places. And so now we've got a variety of different domestic dogs. But if we take a look at Pam, this is Pam's dog Joey. You can notice that, Joey, put your ears up so we can see how short and foxy they are. But you can see Joey's got kind of the things we've been talking about here about dogs and some of their characteristics. He's got the pointed fur-covered ears, again, eyes in front, long snout, and he doesn't have really thick fur because he lives inside. So Pam, why don't you tell us a little bit about Joe's story?
Well, Joey actually had the beginnings of what you'd think a wild dog, where they would come from. My husband and I were on vacation in Montana, Glacier National Park, maybe you've heard of it. We actually found a little dog that was Joey's mom in the middle of nowhere. Literally, I mean, we were up in the mountains, it was snowing, horrible conditions, and this poor little lost dog was left to fend for herself. She would not have survived. She wasn't very large. She didn't, being a domestic dog, she had some instincts for hunting, but they were pretty diminished, and I don't think she could fend off the predators that are there in.
So, Pam, there's a question here from Ken, and he asks, how many animals are typically in a pack or den, which could come into play when you found Gracie, what she might have been up against if she were to stay out in the wild?
That's an interesting question, Kenyon, because it kind of depends on the type of canine we're talking about. A wolf pack will usually have one reproductive pair, an alpha male and a female, but then the offspring and then the previous generations there can be maybe up to say 20 animals in a wolf pack. A lot of that is going to depend on the available resources, how much food is available. More food, more resources, larger packs. In this area, again, we're most familiar with the animals around the Chicago area. You're usually going to see a coyote, it's more like a family group. It'll be the female who's the mother of the pups. The dads are much more, I guess you call them kind of loners. They don't tend to hang out with the group as much. And the female who's reproducing will, again, depending on how much food is available, again, depending on how much food is available, have a litter size anywhere from 4 on up to 8 or more pups that will stay with her then for the coming year. She oftentimes will have help from maybe a sister from her own litter to help raise those pups. But we're not talking dozens and dozens. Mrs. R wants to know how old Joey is. Joey is 10 years old. That trip to Glacier National Park was in 2008, so he'll actually be 11 in October. I wish I could get him. He's probably not going to want to stand up. I wish you could see his tail, but he has a very thin tail, not at all well adapted to spending nights out in the cold the way we would we see the bushy tails on the coyotes and the foxes. You might be able to think of some other dog species that have retained that bushy tail and spend a lot of time in the cold. Huskies come to mind, Malamutes come to mind, German Shepherds too.
Yeah, and a lot of times they say German Shepherds get confused with being wolves because they're big and their coloration. They do have kind of that bushy tail, but yeah, the Huskies, Malamutes, even those heavier coated animals.
Ooh, Emma's got a good question.
Do dogs have similar social rankings as their ancestors, and if not, why?
Well, social animal societies are really interesting, and the rankings that will form in a wild group of, say, let's use wolves. I think they're the most closely studied of the social canines. They need that in order to survive, and there's a hierarchy within the pack. There's jobs within the pack, and domestic dogs, in fact, the thinking is that the dogs that, the wild dogs that were selected to become pets had perhaps been ostracized from their own packs. So they really came into human society lacking some of the social skills that were required to make it in the pack. Maybe they weren't dominant. Maybe they were a submissive type of animal. Maybe they weren't skilled at hunting, but that trait that we see in wild animals gets was bred out fairly early on as dogs became domesticated.
But if you think about other species, you see like prides of lions, they have different hierarchies social-wise. I have a horse who, again, still has that herd behavior, even though horses have been domesticated for thousands of years as well. There's still a hierarchy in their pastures. So some animals do retain that kind of like social ranking within their groups. And that changes too, depending on what types of animals are present and when, who actually is the leader and who actually is the follower. We had another question here. What type of diseases can animals have? It's interesting because Pam had mentioned about the mange that some of our wild canines have, and that has kind of taken down their populations, but they also have heartworm. So if you have a domestic dog, you might know that you are giving your pet heartworm tablets. That can go into the domestic species. But Pam, you have the dog. How about you share how you?
Yeah, well, yeah, Kenyon. So the mange that we talked about and the heartworm that we talked about, those are both parasites that wild and domestic animals can get. And in the case of heartworm, there is a tablet that you can give your pets, your dogs or your cats, to help prevent that parasite. Mange, I don't think there's anything, and if your animal, if you have a pet and it comes into contact with that mite that causes the mange, they can catch that, and you would definitely have to take them in for treatment. Diseases like rabies, if you think about what a pet needs to be vaccinated for: rabies and distemper, leptospirosis, parvo in the case of puppies. Those are diseases that can be fatal to the dog. Some of those diseases can also transfer to humans. Rabies is a deadly disease, and it's vitally important that all domestic, it's not all domestic animals, it's more domestic carnivores.
Right.
You know, dogs and cats are required to get rabies vaccines. That's also why, because humans can catch rabies, if there's any fear at all of having come in contact with the saliva of an infected animal, you need to go through those rabies shots.
We have a question here about what's the biggest threat to a dog. A wild canine, well, besides disease is a huge problem for the animals out there, but I would think they're kind of the top predators in our area here, so probably humans and cars is probably their biggest threat out there, besides getting just a disease. Yeah,
for wild dogs, and you know, kind of interesting, Dylan, coyotes are very, very smart. Maybe you've heard of the cartoon character Wile E. Coyote, although he wasn't too smart. But in general, coyotes are known to be very aware of their surroundings, very careful about things like crossing streets. There's lots and lots of video you can watch of coyotes that will look both ways before they cross a road. Well, interestingly enough, several years back here in the Chicago area, which, by the way, any of you interested in learning about coyote behavior in an urban environment, there's a long-running study. It's called the Urban Coyote Research Project. You can Google it, look it up. There is data being collected year after year after year. Almost 20 years now they've been collecting data on the coyotes in the it started out closer to Chicago, but now some of those animals have actually migrated out here to the far western suburbs. But pretty much any late-breaking news as far as coyote behavior is going to be covered in that study. So Urban Coyote Research Project, check it out.
It's interesting the things they found, because they've marked, they've collared these animals and marked where their territory is. They have animals that are seeing in a 1 mile radius of where they started, and some are covering 4 and 5 miles a night in where they're going in their territory, hunting and just breeding and things like that. So it's really interesting to see where these different animals are and their actions there.
There was one called the IKEA coyote.
Yes,
because a female who lived in
Schaumburg.
In the IKEA parking lot.
At Woodfield Mall. And they did learn, which was really interesting, because they thought with the way coyotes live near humans, that if given the opportunity, they would just scavenge from garbage cans, and they actually found that they will actually eat their more natural diet. Even though human stuff might be around for them to eat, they would more prefer their natural diet of mice and rodents and things like that than actually eating a cheeseburger from McDonald's. They will eat that if there's really scarce food, but that study came out with those kind of things, so that was kind of really interesting to find out what
well, and they ran into a puzzle a few years ago where they had lots and lots of notes about how coyotes will look both ways before they cross the street. And all of a sudden they start finding coyotes that are getting hit by cars, and I thought, what has changed? They're not getting less smart. What is going on? Well, they started looking at the animals that had been killed by cars. They opened them up, they looked around, and what they found was heartworm. The coyotes were becoming infected with the heartworm parasite, made them less fit. They couldn't run after their prey, so they were scavenging more on roadkill. And if they're really hungry, maybe they're not paying so much attention to the cars around them, and end up getting killed. So heartworm is the parasite is transmitted through worms. I mean through mosquitoes. The parasite is transmitted through mosquito bites, and that's actually looked at as perhaps one mechanism that might help curb the growing coyote population.
Okay, we're going to catch up here on a couple of questions. We did have a question about where do red foxes live, and they're like coyotes. That's how they compete, because they're in the same areas. So around here they live like on woodlands, edges of woodlands, where they can have their dens and kind of move throughout areas. We also had a question about where did dogs evolve from, how many different types of species of coyotes. And coyotes do eat deer. They will take down the young deer versus a larger deer because they're smaller animals.
Well, and you know, again, I'll refer back to that wonderful study, Urban Coyote Research Project. You know, back when Miss Pam got involved in this field, it was a long time ago, and the thinking at that time, there weren't that many coyotes around, and B, the fact that a 40-pound animal could take down a 200-pound deer was just, oh, there's no way that could ever be. At that time, too, the coyotes typically were in smaller family units, so and they often hunted alone. So hunting a deer at that time we thought was not possible. Well, things have changed. We've got a lot more coyotes. Coyotes have had a lot more time to observe deer behavior, particularly in the winter. What they've seen is that a deer, and think about this, a deer has hooves, and they've got two toes that form the hard hoof of their feet. They have no traction on ice. Coyotes, as we saw when we held up the paws, they have claws. They have traction. They can walk on ice. So a group of coyotes can herd a deer out onto ice. That ice is slippery, just like Bambi, you know, slipped and fell on the ice. A big deer can slip and fall on the ice. Once they're down, they're kind of powerless to resist the coyote. So yes, a coyote can hunt a deer. Ice definitely helps. I don't know that a healthy deer on solid ground would be something a coyote would want to take on. A deer that's been injured or perhaps is ill, yes, would definitely be something that a coyote might want to prey on in the winter.
Okay, so let's go on here. Let's see. A couple of things, like how do you, Pam, what's your take on like how these wild animals evolved into our domesticated? These animals that we have here, the coyotes and the foxes we're talking about, are important in our ecosystems as far as right now they're the top predators, so they kind of keep things in check from rabbit populations to the deer population, so that's why they're important out there. If we didn't have coyotes and foxes, those animals would kind of run over our areas, but when you lose some of those top predators, sometimes something else will come in and eat those as well. So it's kind of a shift when you talk about food webs and food cycles, what's going on out there with the different populations. But what's your thought, Pam, on how these wolves evolved into our pets?
Well, again, that is a topic of some debate, and again, the theories I've heard are that the indigenous people way back when recognized some very positive qualities in canines, and were able to find animals that would normally live in packs that maybe had been ostracized. That does happen. You know, we always talk about the alpha wolves, the alpha male and the alpha female. Well, there's also the opposite, the omegas. They're down at the bottom of the pack, and sometimes they're not allowed to stay with the group.
Do you think those omegas can be domesticated then?
Well, I think they started off with some qualities that might have made them easier to domesticate. They were probably more submissive, and dogs, as we know them today, are highly trainable. I think that submissive trait probably led them to be able to be trained to do certain tasks. Mm-hmm. I think at the time they were domesticated, they weren't, the concept of house pets, the concept of houses mm-hmm. really hadn't even come to be yet. So, you know, they were definitely brought in to work, to help mm-hmm. carry things, maybe to help with hunting, to guard an area, warn of incoming threats. So I think all of those factors that help the wild dogs survive help them also become domesticated.
But I wouldn't necessarily say go out and try and find yourself a coyote pup and make it your pet dog.
Oh gosh, no.
That's not a good idea. We have a wildlife center that's near us that actually has a rehabilitated coyote. I think he got hit by a car. And he's still very, very wild, even though he is handled by people every day and fed every day. So even though our domestic dogs may have come from wild canines, I wouldn't necessarily advocate for going out and getting a wild animal to create it as your own
Plus
pet.
It's illegal.
Yes.
Nothing else stops you. The law will.
All right, let's see, any more questions here?
Lily would like to know, how can you tell an alpha from an omega? That would be, you know, visually, they probably have all the same traits. You know, a wolf has a thick coat and prominent ears, long nose. You know, the color doesn't really play. It would definitely be in the behaviors. There's another neat resource. It's in a little town in Indiana. It's called Wolf Park, Battleground, Indiana, and they have done decades worth of research into wolf society and how wolves behave, how wolves work together as a pack, what happens to cause an animal to become kind of kick out. If you've ever seen, and I don't know, like Joey, we talked earlier about his ears. See how Joey's ears are kind of pushed back right now? Joey's a little uncomfortable. Joey's feeling, Joey's feeling a little uncertain right now. I would guess Joey might, I don't know if he'd be all the way down at the bottom and as an omega, but I don't think he would be an alpha. He's very submissive. He's very shy. You would probably see downward pointing or downward pushed ears, kind of a hunched over body posture, whereas an alpha animal would have erect ears, pointing forward, an alert posture, and maybe even a little bit of aggression or defensive-ness.
And if you've, there are studies about communication within wolves and wolves packs, so you can kind of see how they find out who's the domestic, who's the dominant one versus not. I think Brookfield Zoo has in their exhibit with the wolves how there's communication within the pack, and you can see that, you know, the alpha will, you know, lead the way, and then the other ones, especially if they're being corrected, again, the downplayed ears, tails tucked between its legs, kind of different posture, back of the pack versus front of the pack. So there are very body language type of communication going on that will indicate alpha versus omega dogs.
Kenny was asking what the word canine means. Correct me if I'm wrong, Lisa, but isn't canine Latin for dog? So canine, and so we've used it in a couple of different contexts here. We've referred to this group of animals we're talking about today as canines, both wild and domesticated. So that canine can refer to this group of animals, but it also, Lisa, when you held the skulls up, referred to the pointy teeth. These have been, we have them too?
Canines.
They're called our canines.
That's the pointy teeth right here on the edge. And this skull, we talked about this being cat. This is a feline. So again, when we're trying to put animals, or even smell that, Joe, trying to categorize things, we categorize things that kind of lump things together. So similar characteristics. So again, a cat would have certain types of teeth, and the rounded skull here. Shorter bones.
Yeah, felines have canine teeth. That's a little confusing.
Yeah, versus the canine skull, where again you have more of the elongated type of skull, but they would have very similar characteristics within the group of canine or feline.
You know, I was going to show you guys so this is a cat skull. It was found in another one of our parks here in St. Charles. You might be able to see it's got darkened edges. It looks almost like it was toasted or charred here. We actually found this skull, oh, you can see back here how black this is. We actually found this skull after a prescribed burn in one of our natural areas. So the fire did not kill the cat. This skull was already removed from the animal when we found it. Coyotes, we talked earlier about how they will attack other dogs and not eat them because they're trying to clear their territory. They will attack cats and eat them. We have a lot of feral cats. Feral means wild, untamed cats in our area, and coyotes will regularly munch on them. They also will grab people's pets that they've let outside. So keeping your cats indoors is a great way to keep your cat safe.
So Pam, we talked about how you wouldn't want to take a coyote pup and make it your own pet. Should you turn Joey out and let him be free and wild like his cousins, or should you make sure you keep him at home?
Oh gosh, yeah, that idea of giving animals, pets, their freedom, and it can hold true for dogs and cats, pet rabbits, turtles, fish, frogs. Once an animal has been kept in captivity, maybe not even as a pet. I know, people like to catch frogs and keep them for a short period of time. The current recommendations are, once it's been living with humans, even for short amounts of time, it needs to stay with the human. So the better approach to that is to actually not take it inside at all. There's so many diseases that can be transferred to wild populations that taking any wild animal in and trying to make it into a pet, even if you think it's only temporary, it's just not a good idea. By that same token, I have a good friend who has a pet dog that was in a forest preserve that was let go there on purpose. It was actually not just given its freedom, it was locked in an outhouse, but people didn't want it anymore. Please, 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 if you have a dog or a cat you can't keep, there's plenty of rescue groups out there that can help you with that. Don't think you need to give them their freedom, because it probably won't end well with that animal.
Okay, there's a question about the book that we mentioned earlier, and it was the Peterson's Field Guide. It's backwards, sorry, but it's a mammal guide. You can go on Amazon or whatever and look up these different types of resources.
Yeah, field guides in general are wonderful resources, and they've got there's bird field guides and reptile field guides, fish field guides. The mammal field guide is actually one of the smaller ones, because out of all those different kinds of groups, we really don't have a lot of wild mammals in North America. But there's information about what the animal looks like. You can see these maps of where the animal can be found. So, if you think you're seeing a kangaroo rat here in Illinois, you might want to look on what we call the range map, right, to see where kangaroo rats actually live. So neat. In the Peterson series, they have field guides for all different kinds of animals, but this is a field guide to the mammals of America north of Mexico. That's what this one's called.
There's a question here, kind of these two things. What's the difference between fox and coyote traits, and do they carry themselves the same, dogs and canines?
In looking, and again, we've had this neat kind of border war going on between the coyotes and the foxes in our natural area, and the tracks. If you look really closely, you can see differences in the tracks between the two. The fox, actually, we talked about hair on the paws. Fox feet are actually furrier than coyote feet, so there's a little bit of difference on how the toe pads appear.
And the size.
And the size, although they're hairy feet, sometimes make their feet look bigger.
Right.
There's also a little bit of a V that can appear on the heel of the track of the fox. But there's a lot of similar sorts of behaviors that when we're talking about traits, I'm assuming we're talking about behavior traits?
Or just physical look.
Yeah.
Because when you look at canines, again, as a species, they kind of have that trotting, walking, they kind of walk similarly, they have the same kind of shape and structure to their bodies. Of course, they fill a little bit different niche. That's why the red fox and the coyote can kind of work in the same area without really overlapping in the same niche. Niche is what kind of the role is of that animal in the ecosystem. Again, these guys are kind of top predators out there, so keeping populations down of the smaller mammals and the different animals out there. But as far as behavior, you probably see a little bit more difference in behavior than you do in actual physical structure.
Have you talked at all about the wet nose? I certainly have been getting joeys on my face from time to time. Joe, can you just look at your nose here, bud? If you've been at all around dogs, you know that they have a wet nose, and that nose, dogs, in the interior structure of the nose, whether it's a wild dog or a domestic dog, that's something that hasn't really changed over time. They have extremely sensitive noses. They can smell things at a great distance. They can smell things up close that we can't smell. Things that smell really bad to us are really interesting to them because there's lots of chemical messages being conveyed. But the nose is almost always wet. In fact, that's, people say, oh, check your dog's nose. If he's got a cold nose, he's healthy. It's cold because it's wet. That moisture helps gather in odor particles, odor molecules, and helps the dog be able to gather as much scent information as it can. Morning and early morning and the overnight hours are when the humidity in the air is higher too. So the wild dogs tend to take advantage of that because it is a lot easier to smell.
And scent carries better with wet than it does with dry.
Yeah.
Raccoons are the same thing. We see them washing their paws, but it's really going to help the scent and taste of the food. Raccoons are the same thing. We see them washing their paws, but it's really going to help the scent and taste of the food that they're eating too. There's a question about, would males fight to become the alpha in a pack of coyotes? And yeah.
There's challenges, and I want to say females too, because there's an alpha female as well. There will be challenges because as animals age, they're what made them dominant to start with, whether it's their keen eyesight or their great ears, their speed, their strength. As an animal ages, that's going to change, and younger animal is going to want to challenge that. So yes, they would. Depending on the two males that you put together, but I would say there would definitely be some sort of a challenge that could end up in a fight.
And you see the hierarchy even with our current pets. If you're walking down at a dog park or you're walking down your street, and there are some dogs that are just kind of walking along having a great time, and some that are always kind of challenging. So it doesn't just go away because they're not in their own pack. Okay. Questions done?
No. Why did we choose animals and not something else?
Because we're naturalists and we like animals?
Yeah, we had a lot of material to share on this particular topic. If there's no further questions, we'd like to thank you for your time today. Happy Friday.
Yay, Friday.
Yeah.
And go outside, look for those tracks from the coyotes.
So they can see it. There we go.
Okay. So go outside, look for those tracks from the coyotes, foxes, see if you can find some scat, and hopefully you'll be able to kind of get a sense of what's out around you, as well as out here at Hickory Knolls if you guys want to venture out this way.
Please come see us.
Yes. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Appreciate your time.